Now, recently, one popular Chinese state-owned newspaper called Huanqiu has attracted quite a bit of attention, both inside and outside China. This is due to a number of rather unusual editorials it's run. Huanqiu, which translates roughly as the Globe, has average daily sales of over 2 million copies and is a fairly nationalistic tabloid which runs heavy on populism and rather light on subtlety. Its sister paper, the Global Times, is an English language publication which runs many of the same articles translated into English, albeit often watered down a little bit, especially with more outlandish or xenophobic rhetoric designed more for its Chinese language base audience. Now, while it's owned by the staid government and party paper of record, the People's Daily, Huanqiu has a very different outlook and certainly a very different style. Recently it came in for some pretty heavy online criticism as well as from its parent paper, the People's Daily, when it ran an opinion piece calling for tolerance for a certain amount of official corruption in China. It also tends to run much more extreme articles and editorials in the areas of foreign affairs and, above all, when it comes to disputes between China and other nations. Generally, these commentaries tend to be far more bellicose than the line from China's foreign ministry, which is often echoed in the People's Daily or the official Xinhua news agency. Well, to hear what sort of reactions these op-eds, editorials and commentaries from Huanqiu have elicited from Chinese net users, let's now join our researcher Esther Deng, who's in the newsroom. OK, Esther, first of all, can you give us a brief idea of what some of these recent Huanqiu editorials were about, the ones that have sparked off all this discussion?
Oh, yeah, sure. As you said, the newspaper's recent articles over the past few weeks have covered a lot of the more sensitive topics between China and other countries. For example, when talking about the territorial disputes with the Philippines in the South China Sea, it says the battle against the Philippines is actually against the regime ruled by Aquino III, and it is his defiance and offenses against China that bothers us most. And it went on to call for the boycotting of imports from the Philippines, as well as banning the country's officials from China. And it also called for personal sanctions by China against a number of Japanese politicians who took part in a PR stunt visit to islands controlled by Japan, but also claimed by China, and said they too should be banned from coming to China. And of course, it's not being too happy with the U.S. either. First of all, over the Chen Guangcheng incident, that was the blind activist who took refuge in the U.S. Embassy before being allowed to leave for the States. Then over the U.S. Embassy releasing air quality data against the wishes of the Chinese government. In one editorial, it says that globalization and the internet had simply enabled the U.S. to have more tools and channels to interfere in China's internal affairs. And it also accused the U.S. Embassy of guiding China's online community to a certain degree. And in another article, it calls on China to fight against the U.S. Not with military force, but with wisdom and courage.
Well, maybe that last comment could even be seen as positive, given some of the calls to arms the paper's made against other countries in the past. Now, this is a popular paper, and it seems to strike a chord, certainly with some sectors of Chinese society. So what are Chinese net users saying about it? What are their thoughts on this?
Well, based on the comments I've seen, I'd say the majority of posters think the newspaper has lost a little, and certainly ignored basic journalism ethics. First, this poster named Yue Jun comments on its call to ban Japanese politicians from China. I was completely shocked at the newspaper report. They have no right to stop any Japanese from visiting China. It's nothing but a newspaper. I feel it totally has no idea of what it is saying. And this poster, Yuan Zai Tianya, can't understand the newspaper's theory that the ongoing dispute over the South China Sea between China and the Philippines is all down to the latter's evil leader. To judge whether a country's leader is good or not is up to that country's own people. And these territorial disputes are between countries, not the country's leaders. On what grounds can the newspaper say this? And as for the newspaper's pushing for fighting against the U.S. with wisdom and courage, or its claims that the U.S. Embassy somehow channels China's online community, well, posters also have a lot to say. I'd like to share some typical comments. First, Pan En has this question in his blog. Why does China have to fight against the U.S. with so-called wisdom and courage? As far as I know, our country wants the U.S. to loosen its control on high-tech exports to China. And so if we fight them, how can we expect the U.S. to do that? And why do we fight against a democratic country which we can actually learn a lot from? And this poster on Sohu.com has this take. So in the eyes of Huanqiu, we Chinese net users are all fools that are guided by the U.S. embassy? Do they have any common sense or logic? But I've also come across some net users who think the newspaper actually does justify itself, although they may not necessarily agree with it. Like this net user calling himself 最好没有昵称 on Weibo.com. In recent years, Huanqiu has become one of the most successful Chinese daily newspapers, and its editorials and commentaries have always had plenty of readers. Although I don't agree with most of its articles, I have to say the newspaper has formed its own distinctive style and stance, and it represents the voices of a certain group of people. And it keeps attention on important issues and has already created its own brand and culture.
Okay, finally, Esther, as we mentioned, Huanqiu is owned by the state-owned, state-run People's Daily, that voice of the government, paper of record. But its recent editorials aren't really in line, or certainly haven't been in line with the official government stance, have they? What do people make of that?
Well, some users also feel confused at the newspaper's recent unusual coverage on certain sensitive topics, like this poster from Liaoning. Well, what this newspaper is doing is actually interfering in other countries' internal affairs. It's not the style of our state-owned media organization, is it? And also, Gou Tong Wei Wang, who asks on Sohu.com, what's wrong with Huanqiu? It seems that just a couple of minutes ago, it was stealing the judiciary's clothes when it called for tolerance for some corruption, while now it seems to have taken over from the foreign ministry. What kind of newspaper exactly is it? And this user named Sheng Ren Yu Kuai has this to say on the same side. Is Huanqiu representing our central government stance? If not, I think they better shut up, because they don't represent the Chinese people's voices either. And some others simply point out that the newspaper is just trying to win attention and publicity with this stance. Like 幸运的大块头先生 who has this guest on Weibo.com. Huanqiu newspaper has been really active recently. Is it because its chief editor is anxious to make a name for himself? And also, 顺纪分达于 has this rather sarcastic on Sina.com. So now the Huanqiu has changed its style to that of an entertainment tabloid. For me, they just want to gain more attention. To be honest, these kinds of reports shouldn't appear in a newspaper. Finally, for a certain number of posters, whatever the reasons behind them and whatever articles the newspaper has published, people don't have to take it seriously. One typical such comment is this one on iNewsweek.cn. Well, Huanqiu is nothing but an online forum. No matter what it says, we don't have to read too much into it.
Okay, thanks for that, Esther.